Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna. I welcome everyone to this Gita Ratnamala session. Today we will discuss a shloka from the 4th chapter of Bhagavad-gita. And this is the second shloka of the 4th chapter, where Krishna describes how the real spiritual knowledge is revived when it is needed. Evam parampara praptam imam rajarshayo viduhu sakale neha mahata yogo nashtah parantapa. Sri Ram, you can recite the first line 4 times. Evam parampara praptam.
Evam parampara praptam. Evam parampara praptam. Evam parampara praptam.
Parikshit, second line. Imam rajarshayo viduhu.
Imam rajarshayo viduhu. Imam rajarshayo viduhu. Imam rajarshayo viduhu.
Good. Sundari Lalita Mataji, child there. Sakale neha mahata.
Sakale neha mahata.
Sakale neha mahata.
Sakale neha mahata. Sakale neha mahata. Sakale neha mahata.
Okay, good. Then Kirtida. Yogo nashtah parantapa.
Yogo nashta parantapa. Yogo nashta parantapa. Yogo nashta parantapa.
Okay, good. Priyansh, 2 lines. Evam parampara praptam imam rajarshayo viduhu.
Evam parampara praptam imam rajarshayo viduhu. Evam parampara praptam imam rajarshayo viduhu. Evam parampara praptam imam rajarshayo viduhu.
Jai. Chinmayi. Sakale neha mahata yogo nashtah parantapa. Are you there? Okay.
Yes, Prabhuji.
Yeah.
Sakale neha mahata yogo nashtah parantapa. Sakale neha mahata yogo nashtah parantapa. Sakale neha mahata yogo nashtah parantapa.
Very good. Divya Krishna, full shloka. Evam parampara praptam.
Evam parampara praptam.
Full. You recite.
Imam rajasrayo viduhu sakale neha mahata yogo nashtah parantapa.
Very good. Then Sri Lakshmi.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Evam parapara praptam imam rajarshayo viduhu sakale neha mahata yogo nashta parantapa. Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Dandavat pranama.
Dandavat. Karthik and Kamakshi. Evam. Yes.
Evam parampara praptam imam rajarshayo viduhu sakale neha mahata yogo nashta parantapa. Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Dandavat pranam.
Svetavaraha Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Yes,
parampara praptam imam rajarshayo viduhu sakale neha mahata yogo nashtah parantapa.
Good. Then Mokshasri.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Recite. Evam parampara praptam imam rajarshayo viduhu sakale neha mahata yogo nashtah parantapa. Okay. Next, Snigdha Mataji. Snigdha Iyer Mataji.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Panchang Pranam. Full shloka has to be recited, Prabhuji.
Yes, yes.
Evam parampara praptam imam rajarshayo viduhu sakale neha mahata yogo nashtha parantapa.
Okay. Krishna Kishore Prabhu.
Evam parampara praptam imam rajarshyo vidu sakalaneha mahata yogo nashta parantapa.
Okay, thank you. So, maybe we'll take 2 more recitations. Nandini Mataji. Okay, Ratikant Prabhu.
Evam param imam rajarishyo vidu sakalenya mahata yogo nashta parantapa.
Okay, then we will discuss the meaning of the shloka. Evam parampara praptam imam rajarshayo viduhu. So the context of the shloka is that Krishna just began the 4th chapter of Bhagavad-gita. Then in the beginning of the 4th chapter, right in the first shloka, Krishna said that Arjuna, I am going to teach you the spiritual knowledge, and I taught the spiritual knowledge before to sun god, and that knowledge descended in this parampara, in this chain of teachers and students, disciplic succession. So he says, Evam parampara praptam imam rajarshayo viduhu. Rajarshis means saintly kings. Raja means king. Rishi means saint. Rajarshi is a saintly king. So saintly kings received this knowledge, spiritual knowledge, in parampara. Evam parampara praptam. Praptam is which is attained. Parampara means through the chain of bona fide authentic teachers and students. In the chain of disciplic succession, the saintly kings received spiritual knowledge. Okay, that's the meaning of the first 2 lines. Next, sakalena iha mahata. But by the passage of time, in due course of time, the succession was broken. The disciplic succession was broken. Yoga nashtaha parantapa. And the yoga, this spiritual science, is lost. So with the passage of time, even good things also lose, right? They are lost. That's what Krishna is saying. Although I have given this spiritual knowledge to great personalities, and that knowledge has descended in parampara, still it is lost now. So I am reviving this knowledge by again speaking this knowledge to you, O Arjuna. So initially Krishna spoke this spiritual knowledge to Vivaswan, the sun god. And sun god spoke this to Manu. And Manu spoke this to Ikshvaku. So in this way, through the chain of great devotees who are also rulers and kings, the spiritual knowledge was propagated in this world. So similarly, Bhagavatam also. Bhagavad-gita parampara we have seen. Now there is Bhagavatam parampara also. Right in the beginning of the creation, the Supreme Lord has given this knowledge of Bhagavatam to Brahma, the creator of the universe. Kasmayena vibhasito yamatulo gnana pradipah pura tadrupena chanaradaya munaye krishnaya tadrupena yogindraya tadatmanatha bhagavadrataya karunyata tatshuddham vimalam vishokam amritam satyam param dhimahi. So the knowledge of Srimad Bhagavatam was given by Krishna personally to Brahma in the beginning of creation. So he gave Bhagavatam in the form of 4 shlokas. That is called Chatushloki Bhagavatam, that comes in the 2nd canto of Bhagavatam. So then Brahma spoke Bhagavatam to Narada Muni. Narada Muni spoke Bhagavatam to Vyasadeva. Vyasadeva spoke Bhagavatam to Sukadeva Goswami. And Sukadeva Goswami spoke Bhagavatam to Sutta Goswami and Parikshit Maharaj and many other people. And Sutta Goswami spoke Bhagavatam to the sages of Naimisharanya. So in this way, the knowledge of Bhagavatam has descended from the Supreme Lord through so many of his representatives, so many great devotees who also became teachers and systematically taught this knowledge, propagated this knowledge. So spiritual knowledge is propagated by pure representatives of Krishna, and spiritual knowledge ultimately originates from the Supreme Lord. Okay, so Krishna spoke and then it descended. So this spiritual knowledge is God's gift to the humanity, which he gave from the dawn of creation. Right in the beginning of creation, after creating the material world, the Lord has enlightened Brahma with the Vedic knowledge. The Lord has given that knowledge to Brahma. So it's not just that Brahma is engaged in some activity. Brahma is also given the necessary knowledge to perform that activity. So even Brahma also had to receive knowledge from a teacher, and his teacher is directly the Lord. So right in the beginning, right on the first day of his creation. So now children are born. When they're little grown up, they're sent to school so that they can learn from school, from the teachers, right? So similarly, Brahma also needs training. He also needs a teacher. He also needs to have knowledge. Because without knowledge, especially without spiritual knowledge, how will we lead our human life? Like animals and birds, they don't go to school. They don't go to college. There is no training program for them, isn't it? But human beings must go to school. There is training program. So because they're more intelligent, their intelligence is supposed to be polished and developed nicely under mature guidance, under able guidance, right? So that's the spiritual knowledge is the gift of the Supreme Lord, the humanity. So, but by the passage of time, that knowledge is lost, right? It's not propagated nicely. It's not preserved nicely, and pure knowledge remains inaccessible to modern people, right? So, not that the knowledge becomes lost as such. Knowledge will not be deteriorated, but the people who take interest in that knowledge become less, and because not many people are knowing it or propagating it, the knowledge as it is becomes inaccessible. Especially when immature teachers misinterpret that knowledge and make it irrelevant to people, then nobody will be excited to know this knowledge of Bhagavad-gita. So these are some facts. So what happens then if the knowledge becomes inaccessible or lost or misinterpreted or misguided? Krishna personally comes and he revives that knowledge. He gives that knowledge again. So through parampara, and Krishna's representatives take over and they will continue to propagate that knowledge more. Now you see, the spiritual knowledge is nicely transmitted through a chain of good teachers. So this is chain of disciplic succession. Now you see there is a chain, and in this chain there are so many rings, iron rings or steel rings connected to each other. So just imagine one ring is not strong enough, or you lost one ring and you try to connect these two parts of the chain with a small thread or thermocol ring, something you have connected, and you are trying to pull a big luggage with that. What will happen? Will the luggage come to you? The chain will break. So in a chain, all the rings have to be strong enough. Similarly, in the chain of teachers and students, in this disciplic chain succession, every disciple should be a representative of the Lord. So if every disciple in a parampara, in a Vaishnava parampara, in a Vaishnava school, is a great devotee of the Lord and studies the scriptures under proper guidance, with dedication and with sincerity, then such people can become actual representatives of the Lord. And when they propagate spiritual knowledge, it's as good as Krishna propagating spiritual knowledge. Okay, so they become bona fide representatives of Krishna. But if a person is not following the principles nicely, then one is not a bona fide representative, and the chain is broken. So means that this ring is unable to connect this big chain to the small chain. Similarly, a person who does not align with the teachings of the parampara cannot connect new people to the parampara, cannot transmit proper knowledge to parampara and bring them to Krishna consciousness, bring them to bhakti, bring them to the shelter of the Lord. So everybody in the chain of parampara should be very dedicated to the teachings and should represent the teachings of the Lord properly. Fine. So now who can treat? So you cannot go to anybody for treatment. If you have some disease, you need to be a bona fide doctor, MBBS doctor or MD, who is authorized by some university or college that, oh, now he can treat patients. He has the necessary knowledge to give medicines or do surgery to the patients. So you will go and get treated only by such doctors, right? but not with anyone. Someone may read books on his own and say, I will be ready to do a surgery. I know how to cut. You just take one scissor, you take one knife and then cut wherever is the injury and then put some stitches. I have needle, I have thread. Okay, so why do you need to go to doctor? I will do it for discount rate. Will you go to such a person? So he should be authorized by the college or some university that offers him a medical degree and authorizes that he can do practice, medical practice, right? So anyone cannot treat. Similarly, who can transmit spiritual knowledge? When you have to hear Bhagavad-gita or when you have to learn Bhagavatam or any scriptures or the Vedas, we need to approach a proper person in the parampara, right? So we need to understand whose disciple is he. Okay, whose disciple is that person? Whose disciple is that person? Like that, all the disciple successions should trace back to Krishna. Okay, so then we can be assured that what we are learning from this person is bona fide, authentic, and good. Okay, so just like anyone cannot do a surgery, anyone cannot treat a patient. Similarly, anyone cannot transmit spiritual knowledge. If anyone who doesn't have qualification start misinterpreting or concocting things and start misinterpreting scriptures and propagates that concocted knowledge, people will be misguided. When more people are doing like that, so people will follow adharma, not dharma. Then what happens? Krishna has to come again and revive the spiritual knowledge. So he gave it to some god and it came on. But again, at the end of the previous yuga, Dwapara Yuga, on the battle of Kurukshetra, Krishna has given that knowledge of Srimad Bhagavad-gita to Arjuna, to the entire humanity. Okay, so now another aspect of the shloka is Evam Parampara Praptam. We discussed about Parampara till now. Imam Rajarshayo Vidu. Now let's focus on the word Rajarshi, second line. Okay, Rajarshis have understood it properly. Raja is king, Rishi is saint. So this Raja and Rishi are the natural leaders of the society, the human society. Raja is a Kshatriya and Rishi is generally a Brahmana. Okay, so Brahmanas and Kshatriyas in the Vedic society, Brahmanas and Kshatriyas are natural leaders. They give spiritual guidance. So Brahmanas give spiritual guidance and Kshatriyas rule the kingdom according to the guidance given by Brahmanas. So you take any king in the Vedic culture, they have some qualified Brahmanas who are guiding them, giving them advice. Dasharatha Maharaj had Vasishta next to him. Okay, so like that, Brahmanas should guide the society. Now, here Rajarshi word is used. Raja and Rishi are combined. Okay, this means a Raja has the quality of a Rishi. Means a king becomes saintly. By associating with saints and by receiving knowledge from saints, the king becomes saintly. So that saintly kings received this spiritual knowledge from previous saints. Okay, and all the Rajarshis understood it this way. And now these are natural leaders of the society. They start administering the spiritual knowledge to common people. So a bona fide king is one who tries to inculcate spiritual knowledge in his citizens as much as they can digest, right? But the whole kingdom is organized and managed with spiritual principles, not with any material motivations. So it is the responsibility of leaders to make spiritual knowledge understandable and applicable. If the spiritual knowledge is not presented in an interesting manner, and if the relevance of spiritual knowledge is not highlighted by the leaders, then people will understand, oh, it's all useless, it's not necessary, it's not mandatory. Let's do something or let's learn something which is immediately beneficial and gives happiness to my senses. That's what people will opt for. But it's the responsibility of the natural leaders of society to make spiritual knowledge understandable and applicable, okay, and show the relevance of that knowledge to common people. Now let us take the example of a rishi or a sage. Vyasadeva is a great sage and he has so many disciples. What did Vyasadeva do at the end of the previous yuga? Vyasadeva meditated on the Supreme Lord Krishna and he has put all the 4 Vedas into writing. Okay, so he has written all the Vedas. In the previous ages, people did not have books. Okay, they don't have printed copies or even the scrolls also. So students will hear from teachers, and as soon as they hear, they will understand it, they will remember it, they can repeat it, they can apply it, they can realize it. So to that degree, people were very intelligent in those days. But Kali Yuga people are not so intelligent, their memory is very poor. So what should the leaders do? So Vyasadeva, being a literary incarnation of the Lord, he has put all the scriptures into writing. Then he called his disciples. Okay, he has written 4 Vedas, and he has entrusted these 4 Vedas to 4 of his disciples. So the disciples took the Vedas, and they divided each Veda into sections and subsections and appointed their disciples to take those subsections and propagate them. Like that, this big chunk of Vedic knowledge is nicely divided into sections and subsections and propagated by Vyasadeva, his disciples, and his grand disciples. Right? So through the efforts of all these great sages, the humanity can take advantage of scriptural knowledge. Right? So that is parampara prapta knowledge. So spiritual knowledge and spiritual culture is preserved by propagating scriptural wisdom. Scriptures give us wisdom, and that wisdom should guide us in maintaining spiritual culture. If we just adopt to material culture and just live based on the urges of our senses only, and not according to some virtuous principles taught by scriptures, like the human beings become as good as animals in one sense. So spiritual culture is preserved by propagating scriptural wisdom, right? So preservation of spiritual culture happens by propagation of scriptural knowledge. So one should, as responsible human beings who are connected to parampara, we should also responsibly study the scriptures and in our own capacity try to propagate the wisdom of scriptures to preserve spiritual culture. Otherwise, material culture will take over, especially in Kali Yuga, right? So now there are so many such Rajarshis. Imam Rajarshayo Viduhu, Yudhishthir Maharaj, Parikshit Maharaj, Uttanapad Maharaj, Dhruva Maharaj, Priyavrata Maharaj, Ambarish Maharaj, so many such Maharajas are there. They all are personally very elevated in their spiritual knowledge, and they also facilitated for the upliftment of spiritual life of common people. So Rajarshi is Raja plus Rishi. Okay, Raja has a lot of responsibility. Rishi is one who has detachment, right? When the detachment and responsibility combine with each other, such a person is called Rajarshi. So Raja and Rishi could be 2 personalities, but Raja and Rishi can be 1 personality also, Rajarshi. So responsible for his citizens and detachment from personal comforts. Okay. So in the name of responsibility, we should not become unduly attached on a material plane. In the name of detachment, we cannot be irresponsible, right? So we should have responsibility and we should also have detachment, right? Detachment does not mean irresponsibility, and responsibility does not mean undue attachment. So Rajarshis are those people who are qualified with both qualities. They have responsibility and they have detachment. So they are responsibly detached. Now, whenever a new king comes, they will give up their kingdom and they will take care of their spiritual life. For example, Yudhishthir Maharaj, he was the king of Hastinapur, but when Parikshit Maharaj became ready to take charge of the kingdom, he just left his kingdom and went to realize himself, went for dedicating his life for the spiritual realization. Similarly, Parikshit Maharaj gave his kingdom to Janamejaya and he retired and had Bhagavatam from Sukadeva Goswami. Uttanapad, he is also a great king. Although initially he did some mistakes, but still Uttanapad is a great king, and he enthroned Dhruva Maharaj as the king and he retired. So like that, there are so many such amazing personalities who are Rajarshis. They are responsibly performing their duties as Rajas, but they also have that detachment and renounced spirit. Okay. Rajarshi rules, he rules the kingdom, but in a renounced spirit. Such a person is called saintly king. So the kings are not attached to their material comforts, their soldiers, their treasury, their queens, their palace. So many things are there, right? So they are not so distracted by all these things. They are just focused on their devotional service while responsibly doing their duties. So a king should be powerful, but should not hanker for power. A king should be resourceful, but should not be attached to resources. A king should be protective, but a king should not be possessive. So all this is possible only when the king is spiritually enlightened. If the Raja is also a Rishi, means if a king is saintly in his character. So Raja becoming Rishi does not mean Raja will not wear a mukut, but he will just have a big bun of hair on his head. That we are not speaking about the symbols or external attire of a Rishi. We are speaking about the character of a Rishi. When the character of a king is saintly in nature, then he will be able to guide his citizens properly. Otherwise, a selfish king will only exploit his citizens, and a selfish king will only use his citizens for his own personal sense gratification and enjoy the power, but he does not utilize the power to spiritually uplift the lives of common people. Okay, so in the previous days, in the olden days, the princes are sent for austerities and training in the forest. So Prachetas, the sons of Prachina Barhi, 10 princes, they all came to the forest to perform some austerities and worship the Lord to purify themselves. So they are given saintly training. Haryashvas and Shavalasvas, the sons of Daksha, they are all sent to the forest so that they can do some austerities and purify themselves. Because when the right time comes, people should be able to give up their kingdom and give it to their descendants. So one should not be attached to the kingdom and throne till the fag end of one's life. So then he is not a saintly king, he is just a king. Okay, or a selfish king. So now you see, Prithu Maharaj is an exemplary ruler. He gives spiritual teachings to his citizens. A king is not just supposed to rule and take taxes from the citizens. He is also an exemplary ruler who gives spiritual teachings to citizens. And he himself also received teachings from 4 Kumaras. Prithu Maharaj is a great ruler who received spiritual teachings and who gave spiritual teachings to his citizens. So in this way, saintly kings conducted their kingdoms. So Prabhupada says, leaders need spiritual training, and leaders should also facilitate the spiritual training of common people. Okay, so then one can be protected from the allurements of material life. And human life is meant for spiritual knowledge, cultivating spiritual knowledge, and kings should facilitate that. Leaders should facilitate that. Okay, so kings are meant to facilitate spiritual education, and actually the best service that a leader can do or anyone can do to others is to bring people to bhakti yoga, to inspire people to perform bhakti, right? So that's the responsibility of a leader. So a king is meant to be doing that. So Prabhupada says, only an enlightened person can enlighten others, and only such people can rule or lead. Okay, so now Raja and Rishi may be 2 persons, or they could be 1 person also acting as a or if there are 2 persons, they should act as 1 unit. So when the word of a sage and the sword of a king are harmonious to each other, that harmony of Raja and Rishi, sword and word, will make our society physically, emotionally, and spiritually secure. So this is how spiritual knowledge and scriptural wisdom must be propagated by proper organization and management by the leaders of the society. Thank you very much. Srimad Bhagavad-gita ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Any questions? Oh, I'm sorry. This is not a question time. So we can have recitations. Okay. Mokshasri, you can recite.
Parampara praptam evam rajashayo viduhu
सकाले ने महता योगो नष्टः परन्तप.
Okay, great. Rishabdev and Gaurhar, you can recite.
Prabhuji, can you show the screen?
Oh, okay, okay. Evam parampara praptam. You can say.
एवं परम्परं प्राप्तम्
Imam rajarshayo viduhu. Imam rajarshayo viduhu.
इमं प्राजर्षयो विदुः
Sakale neha mahata.
काले नेह मतः
Yogo nashtah. Parantapa.
योगो परन्तप.
Okay. Aishita, you can recite.
Can I repeat after you?
Yeah. Evam parampara praptam.
एवं परम्परा प्राप्तम्
Imam rajarshayo viduhu.
इमं राजर्षयो विदुः
Sakale neha mahata.
काले ने महता
Yogo nashtah parantapa.
योगो नष्टः
Parantapa. Okay.
Thank you,
Good.
Prabhuji.
Thank you. Thank you. Then Manikantha. Evam parampara praptam. Recite.
एवं परम्परा प्राप्तम् इमं राजर्षयो विदुः सकाले नेह महता योगो नष्टः परन्तप.
Dharana Mahesh Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Dandavat Pranam Prabhuji. Evam parampara praptam imam rajashayo viduhu